J.D. Vance and Tim Walz meet face-to-face for the only time before the election, and Walz's performance was utterly shameful.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, folks, so first question to everyone. Give us a call at 1-800-684-3110. Did you watch the VP debate? That was probably the last debate we're going to see before. People are already starting to vote, and early voting in some states around the country, but it does not look like we're going to get another debate either at the presidential candidate level or the VP level. So this was it. And for many of us, probably your first chance to see at least Walz, maybe J.D. Vance as well, in that kind of setting. Even if you had been a J.D. Vance supporter, if you were outside of Ohio, you didn't watch like his Ohio Senate when he was running for Senate, like any of the debates like that. So, and the same thing with Walz. Even if you were kind of knew who he was as governor, as a member of Congress, it's a different level when you're on this stage, when every network is covering it. I will say this. I do think the networks, CBS this time, not great. I mean, it was bizarre how they fact-checked. And
I think that was one of those moments that you will remember, which is you said you weren't going to fact-check, and then you did fact-check, right, and then you had to cut off J.D. Vance's microphone, both their microphones. It was sort of, I watched a pretty big highlight reel again this morning, and that one seems to be one of the ones that sticks out. There's 3 or 4 moments. That's one that people keep going back to. Right.
Just the fact that they weren't supposed to be there to do that. That was the job of the other candidates to say, hey, wait, what he's saying is not correct, or what they're saying is inaccurate, and we're going to stay out of that. They did not stay out of it. In fact, they mocked J.D. Vance at one point, too, for saying, thanks for explaining what the law is.
Yeah.
That's so bad for Americans to hear how a law works. I got a little upset with that one because it was like, he just wanted to get in there and say, listen, this is how people who are illegal immigrants can file this piece of paperwork, and all of a sudden it takes them from being an illegal immigrant to not an illegal immigrant.
Right. I was actually unaware of how that works, and he essentially fact-checked himself, and I found that to be very interesting of how they were able to, what their terminology means, what the Democrat terminology means. So when you see that, I think, those moments ago, we can't allow this. It was probably the most civil of the debates we've had, maybe the last decade. The two of them spent most of the time not attacking each other. They spent even time when they were attacking the president or the presidential candidate, Vice President Harris or Trump. Right. They spent more time on that. They spent very little attacking each other. It looked, if we have the numbers actually, Walz attacks Vance for about 1 minute and 20 seconds, and Vance attacked Walz for about 2:43. They both did almost exactly equal time, right at both about 40 minutes, 41 minutes for Walz, 36 for Vance.
About the same amount of time.
Yeah, so it felt one of the more cordial debates. They were shaking hands. They were talking to each other. They were apologizing. It did have moments of civility. I think people probably liked that more than they've liked other debates in recent history. But it also still felt very one-sided. It felt, again, like the conservative candidates are debating the moderators.
Right. Even when they're not supposed to be, even when the moderators are just supposed to be throwing the questions out, we're not going to do any fact checking, don't worry. It's like they keep all of their nastiness to aim at the conservatives.
Yeah, I'd say the one pushback finally was when Walz will play in a little bit, the whole Tiananmen Square situation. That was probably one of the bigger gaffes of the night because, of course, when Tim Walz pushed on one of his now historic lies, what happens is he completely diverted. And at least I can give credit to the moderators for going, now hold on, though. What exactly happened here? Were you there or not? And he still didn't really answer the question.
I think there's some bizarre things with Walz, Tim and Tim. I mean, I think that, again, why were you, the other one? Yeah, the other ones are fine everywhere, too.
Yeah.
Listen, the truth is, these bizarre things you make up that you're part of history, that could kill you. I mean, there are people's other careers in the news. Brian, what was his name?
Brian Williams, yeah. He's
now
on Amazon Prime News, I believe.
Yeah.
Give us a call. We'd love to hear from you at 1-800-684-3110. And obviously, we are deeply following what's going on in Israel. We're going to discuss that later on. Both Rick Grinnell and Mike Pompeo are joining us in the broadcast, so stay tuned for that. And stand with Israel as well by going to aclj.org/stand. A lot of you did yesterday. We appreciate it. Do it right now or scan that QR code on your screen. We'll talk about that more when we get back.
Just 34 days to go until Election Day. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance taking the stage at the sole vice presidential debate. In the first part of the debate, Governor Walz seemed nervous. He had trouble answering a question about whether or not he was in China during the Tiananmen Square uprising.
My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Walz did seem unsteady. And frankly, what I saw in Walz is somebody who has not faced questions on a national stage since he became the Democratic nominee. In contrast, J.D. Vance was very smooth. He took the arguments not to Walz. He was very respectful of Walz, took it to Kamala Harris.
We were talking in the green room a moment ago just about the moderators and the job CBS did. Watch this clip, if you missed last night, where they said they weren't going to fact check.
Process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process.
We're not going to cut your mic.
What a condescending comment
at the end.
It's just
Thank you for explaining the laws to us.
Their bias, their disdain for any Republican candidate is just on open display. Everybody can see that.
Sekulow, we are taking your calls too. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We're, of course, talking about the VP debate. We're also watching very closely Israel as it's, again, there have been 8 IDF soldiers killed in Lebanon. They are slowly moving into Lebanon, it seems, on foot, through tanks, that the air campaign is not going to be the end of that. And, of course, we'll watch that very closely as well. You've seen a lot of Hezbollah leaders be removed from the battlefield by the IDF before this on-the-ground conflict began, but we will be watching that very closely. Netanyahu says that Iran has made a big mistake with attacks that they have been supporting against Israel. Logan, through the debate, we've also been watching as well about just kind of what topics would come up with Walz and J.D. Vance that they would really stick out to people. I did not know that, if I was kind of guessing the day before, that Tiananmen Square would be such a
that it would even come up. I wasn't aware even of this story, and it was the story of Tim Walz claiming to have been there during the events.
I mean, those would have been events to those are
you remember it, and it's also very clear. And it's one of those things where we know he's had a relationship, the way he talks about China, that he loves China and always is discussing China.
He went on his honeymoon to China.
Yeah, and then there was pushback, I guess, from...
That's weird, people. That's weird.
Whatever. I mean, people want to do what they want.
You want to go to communist China for your honeymoon?
I mean, no, I don't. I went
1980s?
I went the American way to Las Vegas, Nevada. That's where I went. But, I don't know if I'd make that decision again now either. Both of those, maybe not the best. I love you, Las Vegas, but I don't know.
Well, he's not communist.
It's true. It's the opposite, maybe. Now listen, though, he brought this up, and I guess Minnesota Public Radio pushed back and said, from what our digging has shown, you were not there during those events, that you did not show up until much later in the year. When they pushed him, if you missed it, here's the conversation.
My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
I mean, kind of a Biden feeling moment. It really had that sort of.
I don't even know where he was going with that.
It had that sort of we beat Medicare feeling at the end of it. It did have that.
We beat Medicare to death.
Yeah, it did have that vibe. Unfortunately, he couldn't really have a good answer for that. And that was like the shortened version we played for you. The real version, especially the initial part, it was a long, drawn-out story about how he grew up in a town of 400 people and the values, and then eventually got itself around to that. Again, I appreciate the civility that came out of this. I appreciate some of the vulnerability. I think you had J.D. Vance coming out to be the most likable he's been in the entire run, because I think there was conversations of that. The point for Vance was to try to hammer home, or for Walz to Vance was to try to hammer home the whole Vance is weird. It's going to be weird. And I think it actually was the exact opposite. You had that moment where Tim Walz comes off as kind of, awkward, strange, has weird stories that don't add up.
Right.
And then you had J.D. coming off as a pretty likable, normal dude. Something that I don't think was expected. But of course, very well-educated guy, has been in these kind of debates probably before, and I think the experience was shown.
Yes, and I think Tim Walz thought, when you're on the left, you can make up a lot of these stories, and people don't fact check you, except that when you get to this level of politics.
Right.
And they even the Democrats want to catch you lying. Even the Democrats want to catch you with a misstatement. And this bizarre statement that you're there for Tiananmen Square is just like I took fire with U.S. troops in Afghanistan. And Brian Williams paid the price for that.
Yeah.
Will Tim Walz pay the price for this? We don't know. At this point, I don't know if it's big enough to decide who people are going to vote for, because these are the VP candidates, and ultimately people usually vote for who's at the top of the table.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, he did say, hey, I misspoke on that. That is, but when really pushed, he finally came out against it. Look, there was another gaffe later on in the show we'll talk about. There are some good calls coming in. I think we should go ahead and take one. Let's go to Jeanette, who's calling online too. Jeanette in California, you're on the air.
Hi. I just had a comment. I noticed last night that Governor Walz didn't really notice that he didn't know that he was on split screen, and he was nodding his head in agreement to just about everything.
Well, Jeanette, I think
I think that was on purpose.
I think it was, Jeanette, because actually, if you look at what they said, and you are right in this, maybe the big takeaway from this was Walz and with Vance saying, hey, we actually agree on a lot more than we disagree. When we disagree, I think the quote was somewhere like we're miles apart in terms of maybe the 2020 election, those kind of things. But when we agree, we actually can get some stuff done. There was some real human conversations there when it was, my son had witnessed or my daughter had witnessed a shooting. And then there was that conversation there where they actually had a moment of going, oh, that's so horrible. I can't believe that. And they had that kind of real, again, human moment. I just think, Jeanette, we're not used to seeing that anymore. Yeah. This is how the debates used to be. They were this, if you go back to a Romney, Obama, they were tough, but they weren't going to shake hands. You didn't get that vibe, that there was ever going to be this moment of
destroy,
of let's just call each other names for 2 hours. Right. That is really a moment that's changed in the last decade.
So you think it's Donald Trump?
I think it was probably Donald Trump, and then the Democrats decided we have to play by those rules, and where they wouldn't have before. And I think you can see that in the original Republican debates in 2016. 2016 original Republican debates for Republicans, it was like five guys playing by the rules and Trump going out there and saying stuff about Ted Cruz and saying stuff about Marco Rubio and really throwing like weird haymakers that no one expected, because it's just not how you play the game. Now, I think that's what attracted people to Donald Trump, because it's not how you played the game.
Haymakers that you can never forget.
Yeah, stuff that sticks with you forever. Now, I think you're like, okay, well, can we counter-program that? And I think they counter-programmed that because they knew with Harris and Trump, they had to do it. They had to play by the Trump's rules. You had to be a bit more hard edge. You had to be a bit more insulting, if you will. But I think you had probably a breath of fresh air from a lot of people. Even I saw Democrats posting that was very nice to see at least some civility.
Yes.
And I do think that. I think in the highlight reel again that I watched this morning of it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot this was largely nice. Even when they said you're lying, you're not, it didn't have that, disdain as a part of the conversation. And people may not like that. I think we had that call saying, he seemed like he was agreeing with him. And I think maybe that's the point, was to show that we're a little bit closer together than we are apart.
Definitely where Tim Walz would like to go. He would like to go and say, listen, You think we're so different from the Trump and the J.D. Vance guys? We're not. They just try to make it sound like we're so bad compared to. We're really, on a couple of issues we might disagree strongly, but on basically everything else we're the same. Yeah. And I think that's where they wanted people to go. They're trying to convince people that you don't have to vote for Donald Trump. You can still vote for us, and you're going to get about the same thing.
Yeah, the idea that, hey, you don't have to. Yeah.
And I think that, again, don't forget the debate between Harris and Trump, because that really did show the differences.
Well, and then Harris saying, remember, you don't have to leave your faith or whatever it is to vote for me. And look, you have a lot of the more left-leaning evangelicals saying that, or even the ones who are more conservative who just hate Trump, saying you don't have to leave your faith to do that. And we have a call coming in that we're going to take actually in the next segment here about the life discussion, because it did come up. Yeah. And look, there's been some debate in that. Trump put out a statement yesterday saying, I'm 100% not going to sign a federal abortion ban. What does that mean for the country and for the pro-life movement? I think there should be some division there. Some people should be, maybe there's some that feel that that's good. Maybe some people feel that that's the wrong way to go. But I know there's some discussion about that. But there was a moment within this debate of where at least what should be non-controversial conversation on late-term abortion came up. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But we also don't want to forget what's going on in Israel. As we went off the air yesterday, obviously it felt like the war escalated to a point of no return, if you will, when it comes to the rocket attacks that were coming in, the terrorist attacks that were happening on the streets. And we want to make sure that you're standing up for Israel and standing with us today. So right now, after hundreds of ballistic missiles were fired at Israel, and thankfully Israel knows what they're doing, and there was not much damage, much civilian casualty, but we need you to stand with Israel as we mobilize our offices in Jerusalem in the face of this unthinkable war. I know a lot of people said those images yesterday kind of evoked the war on terror, evoked 2003, 2002 in Iraq. It did feel that way, where you saw the bombs going in, but of course it was going in to Israel, to some of the biggest areas in Israel, areas that usually aren't targeted, like a Tel Aviv or a Jerusalem. But the ACLJ, we're taking action right now. Within hours of the strike, we delivered a critical demand to the UN Security Council. We have a lot going on right now. We're preparing to send a critical demand letter to the UN General Assembly on these attacks, their biased attacks on Israel. But these efforts require a lot of resources, and the attacks on Israel are growing from all sides, whether that is coming from a geopolitical standpoint or the actual attacks that are going on in the country. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we become a champion for Israel by making a monthly recurring donation right now. You go to aclj.org, aclj.org/stand, and that will stand with Israel. There's a time when Israel needs us to be standing with them. They've got multi-front wars now with Iran. Let's do it, folks. aclj.org/stand.
We start with the ongoing tensions in the Middle East, 24 hours since the announcement of the death of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Fears remain that Nasrallah's killing could spark an all-out regional war. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the attack as an historic turning point.
How does this affect the ability of this militant group to respond?
What we're witnessing is the most stunning Israeli military success since the 1967 Six-Day War. They have flipped the script entirely on Hezbollah in a matter of days. And Hezbollah is reeling, as we've seen now for the past 10 plus days, from the pager attacks, which decimated their internal communications, to now devastating assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and his top lieutenants. Hezbollah right now is lost in the wilderness, and Israel is taking advantage.
Here, soldiers in northern Israel look poised to expand an offensive against the region's biggest paramilitary force, Hezbollah, in Lebanon. They've already killed its leader and devastated its ranks, while also striking Hamas in Gaza.
Our enemies and our friends return to see Israel as it is, a strong, determined, powerful country. But I tell you, citizens of Israel, these are also challenging days. Because even in these days, we should not forget that we are in the midst of a difficult war, the cost of which are heavy.
If Israel was to go in to southern Lebanon as well, what would it do? Its aim would be to push Hezbollah away from the border, to make it keep to the UN Security Council resolution that ended the 2006 war. That means making sure that Hezbollah is to the north of the Litani River. So would Israel go and try to occupy that big area in the south of Lebanon up to the river, or would it go for a smaller scale operation closer to the border?
Welcome back to Sekulow. Again, we are taking your phone calls at 1-800-684-3110. I did want to move on and continue this conversation about Israel and their attacks on Hezbollah and their attacks on Hamas, obviously taking out really the top leadership in Hezbollah over the weekend. But of course, our own officials couldn't waste a moment to not, of course, were they celebrating? We took out 30-year terrorist? No, of course, they're putting out statements like this. And this is from Rashida Tlaib. It says, the Biden-Harris administration continues to allow Netanyahu and the Israeli government to operate with impunity as they carry out war crimes. After facing no red line in Gaza in an attempt to remain in power, Netanyahu is now expanding his genocidal campaign to Lebanon, using the same tactics the Biden-Harris administration has endorsed. We've already seen indiscriminate acts on civilian infrastructure. We've seen Israel officials falsely declare that Lebanon isn't a state and that Israel has a right to invade and occupy it. The U.S. weapons being used to kill innocent civilians in Gaza. They've already claimed the lives of over 500 people in Lebanon, including over 50 children, thousands more civilians. It goes on to say President Biden must implement an immediate arms embargo to end the slaughter and de-escalate the risk of a wider regional war. That, again, is coming from one of our own elected officials.
That's right. Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman from Michigan, is now deciding that this is the time to really stand up for the terrorist organizations, as we've seen terrible language from them ever since really a couple weeks after October 7th, whenever Israel started to respond to that horrendous attack that was conducted against the Israeli people. Now, when you hear something like that at a time also when you're just, days away really from an election, we're just almost at a month. We'll be at a month in just a few days from the general election, knowing the problems that Joe Biden had with the community in Michigan that is represented by Congresswoman Tlaib. You have to wonder what pushback she's getting within her own community right now to put statements out like this. You'd think that something that hypercritical of an administration would not be stated at this exact time. Basically claiming that the current sitting vice president and president of the United States, their policies are furthering genocide. With almost a month to go from a general election, you'd think that maybe you'd phrase it a little bit less harsh against the sitting administration of your party. But no, she's going there. She's calling for an immediate arms embargo. You wonder also what kind of communications they're giving to the Harris campaign, and if we will see, as Kamala Harris has tended to do in this general election campaign that she's run for just a few months now, if she'll come up with a new policy or strategy to try to appease a certain voting group, this one being the representative, the area of Michigan represented by Rashida Tlaib.
Right, exactly. So she's talking to her own people here. But of course, if you don't support Israel at all, which they do not, if they have no feelings or support of them being able to defend themselves, of course they're not going to like the most recent actions, which really, does it escalate? Of course it's escalating. But it's escalating to the point of now, I'd say a point of no return. You have your head of Hezbollah being taken out. You have Hamas very weak. This is time for Benjamin Netanyahu's Israeli government to probably finish the job, to go in there and take care of what they've needed to take care of for decades. I think he believes he is the person to do it. Their administration is the one to do it. And look, I'm not saying it's not even controversial in Israel. There's some people in Israel who have problems with this. There's just as many. It's like the same as here. It's like half and half of liberals and conservatives. But a lot of them do believe in fighting for their own country. Because even we could see in the New York Times, it was the obituary, I guess you'd say, for the head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, they put on there a statement that talked about how, he was actually a pretty, though he was pretty conservative in his views, he did seek for a peaceful country where all people could live together. Of course, that country could not involve the state of Israel.
That's right. This is from the headline, Protesters Mourn Nasrallah's Death Around the World. Meanwhile, I'm seeing celebrations around the world at Nasrallah's death.
Maybe one of the most uplifting moments was after he was even presumed dead, before they even had confirmed it. There was uprisings in the streets in Syria, in Lebanon, in America, in UK, in front of the Israeli, in Canada, in front of the embassies, thanking Israel for doing this because they've been under extreme rule for decades.
And this is from that third paragraph of that article, Protesters Mourn Nasrallah's Death Around the World. Over his 32 years leading the organization and with the support of Iran, he built Hezbollah into a domestic political force and one of the most heavily armed non-state forces in the world. Mr. Nasrallah was opposed to Israel, which he called the Zionist entity, and maintained that there should be one Palestine with equality for Muslims, Jews, and Christians. A powerful orator, he was beloved among many Shiite Muslims and historically marginalized group in the Arab world, and created a state within a state in Lebanon that provided social services.
Let's go ahead and go to Tori, who's calling on line 2 in Texas. And I encourage you all to call in at 1-800-684-3110. Tori, go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I completely and totally back Israel, everything they're doing. They've been fighting since they've been a country. They've been fighting since God brought them into Israel. So if people would pick up their Bible, read it cover to cover, they would understand how much importance Israel holds to the entire world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they would back Israel.
Tori, absolutely. Sadly, I think even amongst the church, that hasn't become the mainstream view anymore. There's been a very big separation of what is modern Israel, what is biblical Israel, what's the difference, why do we need to support Israel, why do we not need to support Israel? Sadly, Tori, I think there's some really warped points of view that are happening right now. That's why we provide this kind of content. We talk about this, important, because I do believe, if you've ever visited or anyone's ever visited, is the biblical homeland of our faith, of the Christian faith, of the Jewish faith, and even of the Muslim faith. It has significance for the three major Abrahamic religions. But when you are there and you feel it and you experience it, it's also the homeland to the Jewish people. And they are surrounded by countries that don't want them to exist. So you push them over the edge a year ago. You push them over the edge when all of a sudden 2,000-ish people are murdered at a music festival. And what happens now is the gloves came off, and now Israel, who has probably the most strategic military force in the world, as we saw those pager attacks, where thousands of people were injured, they were all Hezbollah actors. Of course, there's always going to be, sadly, in war, there's going to be civilians who get in the way. And that is an unfortunate truth. I hate it. No one wants that. No one wants war. Israel does not want war. You may feel like they do from the news, but they do not. What they want is peace for their own country. And they've been fighting for it, as Tori said, since the times of the Bible, and they've certainly been fighting for it over the last 65 years. It is just a sad place to be in when we don't feel like we even have that support here in America. When these should be moments of, you don't want to rejoice over someone's death, but you do want to celebrate when evil is being thwarted from areas. And you see it when you see their own people on the streets celebrating. But then our elected officials in America and our leadership is not. They're saying, how dare they? Look to the people who are actually affected. Those that were under these dictatorships. They were under the rule of someone who was bringing extreme laws that really impacted and hurt thousands and thousands and thousands of people. The opposite of freedom. Phone lines are open for your calls. 1-800-684-3110. Go to ACLJ.org or scan that QR code right now.
Israel is under attack. And every day I see ordinary Israelis acting as champions. Not to win medals or glory, but literally fighting for their very right to live, to exist. Being a champion means choosing to do what's right, to do what's hard, no matter the cost. Here in Israel, it can be a dangerous stand to take, but it's essential if the Jewish state is going to survive. As an ACLJ member, you have an opportunity to be a champion too. You can make a difference. You can impact real change and defend life, liberty, religious freedom, while the media and the misinformed march in support of terrorists, even in America. you can stand strong for Israel. By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life, a champion of liberty, a champion of freedom, a champion for Israel. Become an ACLJ champion. Go to aclj.org champions now.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome to Sekulow. We are taking phone calls to 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We have a lot to talk about. Like, a lot of people have called in, too. Yeah. So I think we can actually start taking more calls.
I feel like more people called in for this than they did for the Trump debate, which is pretty interesting. A lot more people maybe tuned in because, like you said, this was maybe the first time they had seen Walz and they've seen
I don't
Vance.
think they're as afraid of critiquing Walz as they are Trump.
Yeah, and even Vance in the sense of they're looking at maybe this is the future of the party. Right. Because if Trump is to win, that's a one-term presidency, we know that, or one term, and then you have who's right behind him would be J.D. Vance. So what does that look like? And I think he showed himself very well last night, better than he has, I think, in this entire run. So I think he knocked it out of the park. Let's go ahead and take some calls about that, about the debate. We got a lot. Let's just go in order. Let's go to Clay, who's calling in North Carolina. And again, a lot of our calls are coming from North Carolina. We're still obviously continuing to pray for everyone in Western North Carolina and in Tennessee and all those affected by this hurricane, going to a benefit tonight for that. So Clay, you're on the air.
Brother Jordan and Brother Logan, I would like to deeply and appreciatively give my thanks to the Lord for you guys doing what you're doing. I didn't watch the whole entire debate. I watched part of it. And on the way to where I'm eating lunch, I stepped outside because you're taking the call, and I deeply appreciate that. I'm a former, I was in the military. I'm a veteran, and, I know Walz is too. So, I know that there was some stuff that, he did that, I don't know the whole thing, and I don't care about that. But, y'all were talking about what the state of Minnesota said about what, they in a way disown him about, some of the stuff that he was laying out. And I watched it, and I'm like, okay, so we've gone through deception and we've gone through the lying again. And I'm like, okay, so how can people be all right with this? I'm a proud supporter of you guys. I give thanks to the Lord that y'all are doing what you're doing. But, how can people be drawn into deceiving and lying? Yeah. That doesn't sit well with me because
Clay, I think a lot of people feel that way. I don't mean to cut you off. I think that people feel that way when they hear these the ongoing fairy tales that are happening is very bizarre. It is one of those things where that means he was making these promises, probably like Jordan said, during a run for whatever it was he was running for at the moment.
Are you talking about I was at Tiananmen Square?
I was at Tiananmen Square, or I, use those weapons in battle. Yeah. Those are things that you say, and you don't probably expect someone to actually do the digging. But then when you become the vice president or the vice presidential candidate, they're going to start doing the digging. And who did the digging for Tiananmen Square? Minnesota Public Radio. It's not exactly like some hard right. You didn't hear Town Hall found this discussion or this came from the Daily Wire, or this came from us. No, this came from NPR, is who did the digging and found that out about Walz, his own home state's public radio, which meant it wasn't that hard either to find that out. Thank you so much for your call. We're going to take more calls coming up. Rick Grinnell's joining us also in the next segment, so stay tuned for that. Again, give us a call. Phone lines are completely jammed right now at 1-800-684-3110. We're also going to discuss that very bizarre statement he made in regards to gun violence and school shootings in a moment where you could easily say, hey, I meant school shooting victims, families, easy to recover from.
Never did.
Not only never did, you'll see what happens post-debate when everyone else was headed to the spin room. Sean Hannity had on J.D. Vance.
Why didn't he fix that?
And, of course, you had Governor Tim Walz head to a pizzeria in town. I think someone's telling him, don't respond if they ask you about this. But the difference is, I think a lot of politicians would, this is just my theory, a lot of politicians would hear don't respond, and they'd go, okay, I'll figure out my way out of it without actually answering the question. Yeah. Instead, it's not what he did. He just flat out, you'll see, doesn't respond to the question, gets kind of scared, as it seems to be his deer in the headlights look that continues on for Tim Walz. We'll be right back again with Rick Grinnell, and then later on the broadcast, Mike Pompeo will be joining us as well.
Too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Go to ACLJ. Yeah, probably not. ACLJ.org, again, to stand with Israel and support them today. We'll be right back.
A statement yesterday, which I thought was very unique. I saw it was on X. It was from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it was made, I think, about 12 to 15 hours before Israel increased its operations in Lebanon, deeper into where it wasn't just kind of Hezbollah safe houses, but where ordinary folks might live. And it was a warning that said, if you're getting the phone call, if you're getting the text from us, if you're seeing the leaflet and seeing this information, you're in danger. You have time to leave, but you need to do that immediately. Go north. And we saw then, you could see it because of the media that is there, the logjam of cars that took those warnings seriously from Israel. But it does show, again, it underscores the difference of dealing with the state of Israel.
Israel is trying to preserve life. Now, when Israel does this, let's understand, of course, Israel's critics, which are numerous, are saying they only gave them 2 hours. I mean, what other military does this? They're saying you have 2 hours to leave, meaning they know that terrorists are also going to scramble. They know that they may have to fight them again elsewhere, but they also know that, not unlike what we saw in Gaza, and maybe to a different extent, though, Hezbollah has dug into these neighborhoods, to these areas where civilians live. They have not only ammunition caches, they have launching sites. There are terrorist headquarters that are throughout these areas. So Israel's warning the civilians to get out, knowing that the terrorists will leave, but also knowing that the infrastructure there is vital to wage this war, because the kind of stockpiles that Hezbollah has of Iranian weaponry can reach, and we're already beginning to see it, very deep into Israel, very highly targeted and extremely dangerous, and including, we don't know the extent of non-traditional warheads and capacities they have, chemical, biological, other weaponry. These people will do anything. They want to murder as many innocents as they can, and that's the war Israel's fighting.
There is so much happening right now in the Middle East, and I believe that's why God has sent Jordan Sekulow to speak to all of us. His message is going to be on page number 26. Let's go to page 26 in our book, Why Israel Matters to You. On Sunday at Prestonwood Baptist Church and all of our services, we prayed for the peace of Jerusalem. Jordan Sekulow, the Executive Director of the American Center of Law and Justice.
Thank you all for inviting me here today to discuss a topic that I think we all know is of immense significance if you turn on the news even this morning or last night. Israel and why her safety and security are not only relevant to the Jewish people, but to the entire world, even those that don't realize it. Now, on a personal level, Israel, it matters to me because I am a Christian, and it is a sacred land of profound significance in our faith. Because I am of Jewish heritage and very proud of it, it matters to me that much even more as a place of safe haven if it was ever necessary for me and my family. In the book of Genesis, God says of Israel, I think many of you have heard this verse, but we have to always remember it. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. Pretty straightforward. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Not all the Jewish families of the earth shall be blessed, but in you, all the families of the earth who stand with Israel will be blessed. But let's just get blunt for a second. I actually find the question of whether or not Israel matters to be completely ludicrous. Why? No one ever asks why Belgium matters. Anybody ever ask you why Sweden matters or any other country in the world? And yet the validity of the state of Israel has been debated, discussed, defended since the country's modern founding in 1948. And yet Israel, a nation born of an ancient past, earlier than most of today's world powers, and Israel, yet today in 2024, remains a key player in the modern world. And its importance can be viewed through many lessons. Israel holds deep religious, obviously, significance for millions. Not just Jews, but Christians and Muslims and Druze. But Israel also serves as a bastion of democracy in a very volatile region. It's interesting that it's the most censured country by the United Nations because it's the only country in the Middle East that follows the UN Declaration of Human Rights and provides those rights to its citizens to choose their faith or have no faith at all, to choose their partner in life, whoever they may be, to have freedom of speech, freedom to choose who to vote for, freedom to leave, freedom of travel. So it stands in this bastion of a very difficult region of the world. And yet the world doesn't see it as a testament of freedom, but instead we see it as this resilience after centuries of persecution. It's worth noting, if we look back through history, there's a clear pattern. Any group that has attacked Israel or seeks to destroy her people, whether it's the Nazis and Adolf Hitler, or all the way back to ancient Egypt, these were much larger armies, much stronger armies. But yet, they all suffered as a great result. Some are still suffering today. We see that in Europe. There'd be no surprise if the same fate befalls her current enemies. Of course, that will depend greatly on those of us in the United States and in the United States government. And you may say, well, why? Well, Israel needs allies, and the United States needs allies, more so than ever in a world where there are increasingly countries with powerful nuclear weapons, with expanding technology, who could turn those weapons not just on Israel, but on the United States. We need allies in intelligence, security, front lines of terrorism. And I think we all, who lived through 9/11 and the Islamic terrorism that followed through ISIS and other groups have realized that. Israel is on the front line of that fight, but that fight has come to the United States multiple times before. You can't set aside Israel's significance to our Christian faith, though. It's essential to everything we believe. But I want to examine a little bit of its historical and practical importance to all people, not just people who are believers. And so to understand why Israel matters, we must first take a look at the long arc of history. Israel's history is undeniably crucial to the history of our entire world. Its story begins thousands of years ago. For Jews, Israel is not simply a homeland established after World War II by a stroke of modern diplomacy. Returning Israel to the Jewish people was just a fulfillment of the promises that stretch back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is the land where King David ruled, where the temple stood, where laws were made before there was a Europe, before there was an America, and before there was even an idea of a, quote, Palestine. Israel thrived as the ancestral home of the Jewish people. And the Jewish connection to Israel is one of the most unique and steadfast in possibly all of human history. Throughout centuries of exile, following the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in AD 70, the Jewish people maintained a spiritual connection to their homeland. For 2 millennia, prayers for a return to Zion and Jerusalem have been central to the Jewish religious life, expressing the collective longing for return to their ancestral homeland. No other people have maintained such a deep and enduring connection to a land over such a long period of time. While Israel's achievements and its contributions to the world are undeniable, we know it will always continue to face significant challenges. There's extremist organizations and hostile governments that continue to threaten Israel's very existence, even right now. We see in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has persisted for decades, and of course with Hezbollah most recently, which is an ongoing conflict that looks increasingly like it could become
not just an air war, but one on land. In fact, just to tell you how close Israel is when they are firing at Lebanon right now and firing at Hezbollah targets, they're firing from tanks. So they are using air, but when you're firing from tanks now, you're getting steps closer to going in. Because ultimately, as the U.S. knows with Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and Israel knows with Hamas or Hezbollah, if they aren't destroyed, this will just keep repeating itself over. They will do something outrageous, violent. Israel will have to respond. The world will, for a couple of weeks, give Israel some hope that, oh yes, that was horrible what happened on October 7th. And then 2 weeks later, when Israel decides how to respond, the world begins to forget what happened on October 7th and the babies that were put in microwaves and filmed being killed. They forget that, and they just focus on supposedly what Israel has done through the air. Hamas, on October 7th, launched the worst attack on the Israeli people in modern history. Think about that for a moment. You lived it. All of us here. You were alive for it. Over 1,000 innocent people were brutally murdered. Unspeakable ways. I don't want to get into all of them here in this large session, but it was pure evil. The victims were slaughtered by the extremists while they attended a concert for peace, and they were also in their homes. And over 40 of those murdered were our brothers and sisters, Americans. Another 251 victims, of course, we know were kidnapped. That's down to less than 100 right now. Some Americans are still being held as, again, in the tunnels, in the dungeon tunnels, as we call them, of Gaza. And yet we don't hear it enough from our administration. Get those Americans home. Figure it out. You know, these are not just Israelis. These are our brothers and sisters as Americans being held. So in conclusion, we must continue to support Israel as it strives to fulfill its promise as a homeland for the Jewish people. Not only because of its historical and spiritual significance to our Christian faith, but because Israel is a force for good in the world. May God bless the state of Israel. May God bless America. May God bless all of you as well.
Please join with us and stand with Israel. Go to aclj.org/stand or go to aclj.org in general. Scan the QR code. Support the work. Become an ACLJ champion if you can. That's someone who supports on an ongoing, recurring basis. Pray for our friends in Israel.
aclj.org. Donate today. We'll be right back.
Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment.
Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined now by Mike Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo, we're going to get your thoughts on the debate because the Middle East, though, was front and center last night during the debate, but we didn't really hear anything about the different wars going on, whether it's Russia or Afghanistan. It feels like the Democrats are running away from their own foreign policy in this moment. We've spent a lot of time talking about Israel, and we should, because Israel maybe had one of the most horrific moments in this entire conflict happen yesterday, obviously not compared to October 7th, but then later on, having all these rockets come in, having the terrorist attacks on the street, the unrest that we're feeling right now. But we can't forget of what the policies that have led us here have led to that. We had peace, relative peace, maybe the most peace we've ever had in the Middle East while you were serving in the administration, to the point where I talked about in the last segment that I got on the air, and I remember during the Abraham Accords being emotional on the air. And I said that I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. And here we were having, them celebrating Hanukkah in Dubai and having Israeli families being able to visit all of these countries and there not be this just continual sense of unrest. And then I said, when President Biden was elected, you all are forgetting, and look, I have to say, I wish it was a bigger topic, and thankfully this time it is. You're all forgetting about Islamic terror. And you're forgetting about it, but guess what? I know when I'm talking to you in 4 years, we are not going to be forgetting about it. And here we are, Secretary Pompeo. Here we are on the brink of maybe one of the biggest wars, what feels like in our lifetime in the Middle East.
Exactly right. Here we are. Here we are with an American leader who is occupying the presidency today, but only nominally. Who the heck's making decisions while Vice President Harris is out on the campaign trail? It's a really dangerous 4 months, and you can see the net effect. You opened your question by speaking about the fact that last night's debate, as best I could tell, had no mention of Afghanistan and only a cursory discussion of anything more broad, including the Russian aggression in Ukraine. These are all symptomatic of failed American leadership. It's not political. It's just the bad guys feel free to move about the cabin when America abandons the global stage. And when American leaders refuse to defend the things that matter, when they don't put America first, you get this kind of risk. And the Middle East is now ablaze. Chinese Communist Party is certainly making waves. And we, of course, know that the effort of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine continues. And we had 13 dead Americans in the summer of 2021 in Afghanistan. Today, President Biden is saying he's taking phone calls from leaders. He's telling them don't, but don't isn't a foreign policy. It's not a strategy. It is a plaintive cry. And our friends don't trust us and our adversaries don't remotely fear us.
Yeah, that feels like the common thread that's happening right now. I think that there could not be a better way to put it. And you've seen, whether it is our adversaries or we've seen Israel's adversaries, really, like I said, not take it seriously that America will get engaged in a way that's sufficient. Now, we're not calling for troops on the ground in Israel, anything like that. But the response from Israel is going to be what seems to be pretty historic. We don't know what that will look like, but what do you expect over the next few days? Is there any hope that this gets de-escalated, or do you think that we have hit that sort of point of no return?
It's a fool's game to try and predict precisely how this will unfold. but we know this much, that the Israelis have clearly decided two things. One, they can't rely on the United States. They didn't tell us about these things they've done in advance. That's pretty darn unusual for them to not at least not seek permission, but notify us in advance, saying, here's what we intend to do. Look, they were worried that somebody, Jake Sullivan's team or somebody in Secretary Blinken's office would link it to the Washington Post.
Right.
And so they don't trust us. And second, they have concluded that they have no choice but to take down this risk themselves. And if they don't get help from us, they don't get help from the Europeans, they don't get that's a risk they have to take, because you can no longer live when you have 80,000 people that can't return to your homes in the north. You can't live with an adversary on your border, either from Syria or from the north in Lebanon or from the west in Gaza or even in the West Bank, that is armed to the teeth with precision-guided munitions. They've got to take that risk down, and I have every confidence that they intend to do that until they believe they have created for themselves, right, the classic case, right, self-help. They have for themselves eliminated this risk to the greatest degree they possibly can.
Secretary Pompeo, thank you so much for joining us. I want to encourage everyone to go to ACLJ.org to read a new piece by Secretary Pompeo, the Biden-Harris administration's fatal and foolish foreign policy. We're just over a month until Election Day, and it really kind of highlights the dangers of this policy on the world stage. Secretary Pompeo, thank you so much for joining us. I did want to take a few of your calls if we can. I know a lot of you have been on hold for a while, but it's been a packed broadcast. Let's go to Melissa first, who's an ACLJ champion, and they get first right. Let's go to Melissa on line 4. You're on the air.
Hey, Logan, I just wanted to say, first of all, that I thought that the debate was great. I think that J.D. Vance's character and demeanor brought the debate to actually be a debate as opposed to an ongoing attack of character. And I completely agree with Rick and Mike on the issues with our world at this time. But I thought it was a great debate. Walz was Walz. It's who he is. I don't think he was any different than he ever has been.
Yeah, Melissa, I couldn't agree more. Actually, I think it was the first time. I have no real feelings one way or the other towards J.D. Vance before. I liked his speech. I had no ill will towards him by any means. But last night, he kind of won me over as someone who I really enjoyed his performance. So thank you so much for calling. And always thank you for being an ACLJ champion. That's someone that donates on a monthly recurring basis. Let's quickly get a few more if we can. Trisha's calling from Texas on line 6. Trisha, you're on the air.
Thank you so much. And I did not get to watch the debate, but I've listened all morning to your show. Wouldn't it be great if what we've lost in our nation is intellect? And all of the short video clips where President Reagan, was with Mondale, and the guy just lost it. He smiled. He knew that Reagan was right. Yeah. Dick Cheney, when he was with Bush, I can't remember who he was debating, but, the American public needs to see strength, but not assassination of character strength. Their mind shows. And I think that something like that, if somebody went back into the past and grabbed all those short clips, then we would begin to figure out the puzzle.
Yeah. Tricia, I think that's an interesting point of view. Cheney would have debated. John Edwards would have debated also Joe Lieberman. So those would have been the two there. But we appreciate your feedback. I want to get, and I think that's a good idea. Let's get to one more call. Let's go to Ross. Very quickly, Ross. I know you're on hold for half hour, but we have 1 minute left in the broadcast. So just give it to me about 30 seconds.
Okay, Jordan. Thank you. No, it was just a great debate. I was really impressed with J.D. Vance. He did a masterful job, and he really won me over to him. I thought he'd be arrogant and a bully, kind of like, a junior Trump, but he was masterful, and it really impressed me, and he is our future. I hope he's our future president for us. So thank you.
I appreciate it, and I think he won a lot of people over last night. I think that happened. I think something that maybe even the campaigns were concerned about, that maybe they had lost some people with J.D. Vance. But I think last night proved otherwise, and I think all our callers today proved otherwise. So I appreciate everyone for calling in and supporting the work of the ACLJ. Look, it is on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year. So please join with us and stand with Israel. Go to aclj.org/stand or go to aclj.org in general. Scan the QR code. Support the work. Become an ACLJ champion if you can. That's someone who supports on an ongoing, recurring basis. Pray for our friends in Israel. Talk to you tomorrow.